Snow drifts across a quiet American town, the streets empty except for a 15-year-old boy on a rusted bicycle. His shoes are torn, his jacket too thin for the bitter wind, yet his eyes carry a strength far beyond his years. At a lonely bus stop stands an old man, shivering, forgotten by every passerby, until the boy stops, and their lives are forever changed. Where are you watching this from today? Leave a comment and let us know. We love hearing from you. May your day be filled with warmth, blessings, and kindness wherever you are. Ironwood, Michigan, lay wrapped in the grip of late winter, its narrow streets half buried in gray slush, and the lake wind cutting like a blade through every seam of a jacket. Smoke drifted from the few chimneys still stubborn against the cold, curling upward and vanishing into a sky the color of dull pewter. It was nearly evening when the street lamps flickered with weary effort, and the town seemed to draw into itself, doors shut, windows glowing faintly against the dark. At the far edge of Maple Street, where the asphalt cracked into broken patches of gravel, a boy leaned low over a rusted bicycle, legs pumping against the weight of both the wind and his delivery satchel. Caleb Turner was only 15, but his frame was stretched thin like a tree sapling too long in winter shade. His skin, a rich deep brown, bore the roughness of cold nights spent outdoors, and his hands were red and raw where his frayed gloves had given way. His shoes, once a decent pair of sneakers, had holes patched with duct tape, and each pedal drove a sting of cold air through the torn fabric. The bike itself was as much a relic as a companion, an old Schwinn his mother had ridden to work years ago before illness claimed her. The chain squeaked in protest at every turn, and the crooked back rack rattled like loose bones. For Caleb, it was lifeline and inheritance in one, the only thing that still carried her scent and faded memory, and the only tool by which he scraped together money enough for food and the narrow attic room he rented from Mr. Pierce, a landlord as unyielding as the Michigan frost. On that night, Caleb had one last delivery to make. The parcel wasn't large, an envelope of medical documents bound for a family across town, but it was crucial. The extra dollar tip he hoped to earn was the difference between paying his rent or being turned out into the cold. Mr. Pierce had warned him bluntly that morning. No rent by 8, no key tomorrow. Caleb felt the words like a weight in his chest, as heavy as the icy air he breathed. He adjusted the strap of his satchel, preparing to mount the saddle again, when his eyes caught movement at the bus stop just ahead. The shelter was little more than a cracked bench and a faded plastic roof, battered by years of wind and salt. There, standing hunched in a long wool coat that sagged at the shoulders, was an old man. He was tall once, but time had bowed him, his back bent, his hands trembling around the head of a worn wooden cane. His hair, what was left of it, was pure silver, sticking out beneath a wool cap that had lost its shape decades earlier. His eyes, pale blue and clouded, darted nervously at each passing car, as though searching for a face he could not name. He muttered under his breath, shifting a step toward the curb and back again, as though caught between worlds. People passed him as they always did. A woman tugging a grocery cart leaned away, eyes fixed on her phone. 2 men in heavy jackets strode by, heads down, never glancing his way. A bus roared past without stopping, its driver unwilling or unable to notice the lone figure. Caleb stood with his bike at his side, watching. Something about the man's stillness was wrong, not like someone waiting, but like someone lost. His lips moved, whispering fragments. Hawthorne, number 12, Garden Street. The words broke apart in the wind. Caleb hesitated. His mind leapt back to the envelope in his satchel, to the narrow attic bed that might already be gone if he wasted time. Every tick of the clock was a nail in the coffin of his security. But then the wind shifted, carrying the man's voice clear enough to pierce the boy's hesitation. "I just need to get home." The words trembled, fragile as frost. Caleb swallowed hard. He pushed his bike forward, the squeak of the wheels startling in the quiet. "Sir," he said gently, not wanting to alarm him. The man turned, blinking as if he had been woken from sleep. "You all right?" The old man stared at him for a long moment, eyes flickering between memory and confusion. His voice, when it came, was gravelly, yet thin. "I missed the bus, I think. Or maybe it missed me." He chuckled, the sound brittle, like glass ready to crack. I live on Hawthorne, I believe. Or was it Maple? His hand fumbled with a leather wallet, spilling onto his palm, nothing but coins, buttons, and a faded photograph of a farmhouse. No address, no bus ticket. Caleb's heart clenched. His eyes shifted to the man's cane, to the way his knuckles shook from cold, and then to a small metal tag that dangled from the cane's strap. He leaned closer and squinted. There, etched in fading letters, 92 Hawthorne Lane. Caleb knew the road. It lay beyond town, up through the frozen ridges, 2 hours by bike. He looked down at his satchel, then back at the man. If he rode now, he might just make his delivery in time. If he helped the old man, he would lose everything. He thought of the attic room, of the cracked mattress and the draft that cut through the ceiling, meager comforts, but comforts nonetheless. Then he met the man's eyes again, eyes clouded but shining with the faint light of trust. And Caleb felt his choice. He pulled his jacket from his own shoulders and wrapped it around the old man's back. "It's far," he said softly, "but I think we can make it. Do you trust me?" The man's lips quivered into a smile. "You remind me of someone," he murmured. "My grandson, maybe. Always had scuffed shoes." Caleb nodded, though his shoes were more than scuffed. They were torn nearly to ribbons. He led the man carefully to the back rack of the bicycle, tying his scarf across the seat for comfort. The metal groaned under the added weight, but Caleb steadied the bike. "Hold on tight," he whispered. As he mounted the pedals, the town lights behind him flickered once more, then faded into the shadows of Maple Street. The road stretched ahead, a dark ribbon climbing into the frozen hills, and Caleb pedaled into the night, the choice made, the clock forgotten. The wind off Lake Superior carried a sharpness that bit at the lungs and stung the eyes, as though the night itself were warning travelers to turn back. The lamps along Ironwood's main street cast halos of amber light against the falling snow. Their glow swallowed quickly into the dark. Shops were shuttered, the glass of the diner windows fogged with warmth inside, laughter faint behind the walls. Outside, on the cracked pavement of Hawthorne Avenue's edge, Caleb balanced his bike with one hand, steadying the old man with the other. The cold had deepened. His breath came out in plumes that hung like ghosts in the air. The man's shoulders quaked beneath the jacket Caleb had wrapped around him, and his cane trembled where it rested against the rusted rack of the bicycle. "I can't quite recall," the old man muttered, fingers fumbling at the leather wallet again. His voice, though rough, carried a trace of refinement, as if once he had spoken in lecture halls or boardrooms, but time had whittled it down to a fragile rasp. "It was Hawthorne Lane, or perhaps Garden Street. Number 12. Yes, the 12 bus was meant to stop here. Did it pass already?" His pale eyes searched Caleb's face with desperation, and then flitted to each passing car, as though an answer might be written in their headlights. Caleb pressed his lips together, thinking of the envelope in his satchel and the relentless ticking of the clock in his head. Yet, as the man shuffled closer to the curb and then back again, as if tethered to confusion, Caleb felt his resolve tightening, not to leave, but to stay. The old man pulled out the contents of his wallet, coins dulled with age, a bus transfer from days ago, and a photograph, corners curling and image faded. Caleb leaned closer. The picture showed a farmhouse beneath wide oaks, a boy and girl standing beside a tall man who looked just like the figure before him, only younger, stronger, with a posture unbent by time. Something about the photograph's loneliness made Caleb's chest ache. Then he saw it, a keychain dangling from the old man's cane strap, its brass plate scratched but legible. Squinting through the dim light, he read, 92 Hawthorne Lane. His heart sank. He knew the place. The road twisted uphill beyond the town's edge, 2 hours of punishing pedaling through snow and ice. By the time they reached it, he would have missed his delivery. Mr. Pierce would throw his belongings into the street, and Caleb would sleep in the cold. The boy clenched his fists in his pockets. He thought of the attic room, drafty but still his own. He thought of the mattress, thin but warmer than the street. He thought of his mother's voice, how she used to say, "Never walk past someone in need. You may be the last chance they have." Her words stirred like embers, refusing to die. From across the street, the diner's door swung open, releasing a breath of warm air and the scent of fried onions. A girl stepped outside, balancing a tray of dishes and shaking the ache from her wrists. Rose Miller was Caleb's age, 15, with auburn hair tied back under a kerchief, cheeks flushed from heat and work. She wore a diner apron stained from hours of pouring coffee and bussing tables, and her shoes were thin, the soles cracked from too many double shifts. She glanced up and saw Caleb, his bike, and the old man shivering beside him. For a moment, their eyes met, and though no words passed between them, Rose tilted her head slightly as if to say she understood the weight of his choice. Inside the diner, her mother lay in a rented room above, confined by illness that robbed her strength each day. Rose worked every shift she could to pay for medicine, often going hungry herself. Caleb knew her story only in fragments, whispered around school before he left to work full-time, but it was enough. The sight of her, standing in the doorway with weariness lining her young face, pressed the truth harder against his ribs. Survival was cruel, but kindness was rarer still. The old man's voice drew him back. "Do you know the way, son? Hawthorne Lane, number 92. His hands trembled around the photograph, his lips quivering with both cold and confusion. Caleb swallowed, lifted his eyes toward the road that vanished into the snowbound hills, and felt the final tug of decision. He wrapped the scarf tighter around the bike rack, steadying the man into the seat. The frame groaned but held. "It's far," Caleb said quietly, forcing a smile to steady the man. "But I'll take you home. Hold on tight." The man looked at him, eyes softening with fragile trust, and murmured, "You remind me of my grandson. Shoes always scuffed, heart always too big." Caleb pushed off, the wheels creaking into motion. Behind him, Rose watched from the diner steps, her arms folded against the cold, lips parted as though she wanted to call out but couldn't. She let the door close, carrying his silhouette with her, and returned to her shift, her heart heavier but strangely warmed. Caleb pedaled into the night, the town's faint lights falling away, his satchel heavy with the envelope he would never deliver, but his soul already lighter with the weight of a different promise. The night deepened as Caleb pushed his bike out of Ironwood's last lit street, the glow of Main Street's diner fading into a blur of warm yellow squares, swallowed by the dark. Ahead, the road to Hawthorne Lane coiled into the hills like a frozen serpent, its spine slick with patches of ice and slush. The snow had begun to fall heavier, soft flakes turning sharp in the wind, needling against Caleb's cheeks until they stung. His breath came out ragged, each exhale visible in the dim beam of the solitary street lamp they passed before the lamps grew fewer, then vanished altogether. Beside him, perched on the rack tied with Caleb's threadbare scarf, the old man clutched the sides of the bike, murmuring half-formed words like prayers. Caleb's legs burned with effort, his thin frame too young and underfed for the weight he now carried. But something in him pressed forward, pedal after pedal. Each squeak of the chains sounded like a complaint, yet it kept moving, a rhythm that seemed to beat in time with his heart. The old man hummed suddenly, a low tune, broken in places, but carrying the melody of a hymn from decades past. Caleb didn't recognize it, but the sound filled the silence between gusts of wind and somehow steadied him. "You've strong legs, boy," the old man croaked after a time, his breath clouding against the back of Caleb's neck. Reminds me of farm roads when I was young, miles before breakfast and miles more before supper." His words drifted, then tangled, then fell into silence again. Caleb wanted to answer, but saved his strength for the road. The fields beyond Ironwood spread wide and empty, each fence post capped with snow, each frozen ditch glinting faintly under the moonlight. A fox darted across the path ahead, vanishing into the woods. Caleb tightened his grip, jaw clenched, pushing harder against the slope that rose beneath his tires. The old bicycle rattled, the back rack swaying beneath the old man's weight, but Caleb refused to falter. By the time they reached a crooked bridge spanning a stream half frozen over, Caleb's thighs shook, his fingers numb on the handlebars. The old man coughed, leaning forward slightly. "Cold," he whispered. Caleb slowed, scanning the dark horizon for shelter, when the faint glow of a roadside gas station appeared beyond the bend, its neon sign sputtering like a weak star in the black sky. Relief surged in Caleb's chest. He guided the bike to the station, parked it against the wall, and helped the old man off carefully. Inside, the air smelled of oil, dust, and stale coffee. A clerk barely looked up from a magazine, uninterested in two weary figures. Caleb dug into his pocket, fingers brushing the last crumpled dollar he owned. He placed it on the counter and pointed toward the metal urn steaming behind the glass. "1 cocoa, please." The clerk shrugged, poured the drink into a styrofoam cup, and slid it across without a word. Caleb placed the cup into the old man's trembling hands. Steam rose, fogging his glasses as he took a sip. Then, unexpectedly, he pushed it back toward Caleb. "You drink first," he said firmly, his voice carrying a sudden, stubborn authority. "You need it more." Caleb hesitated, but the man's pale blue eyes bore into his with the kind of sternness that only age could carry. He sipped, warmth rushing into his chest, then handed it back. The man smiled faintly, lines of gratitude softening his face. Outside, snow swirled harder, but the brief stop had stitched a thread of warmth into their journey. Caleb helped the man back onto the rack, pulled his scarf tighter around him, and began pedaling once more into the teeth of the night. The road tilted upward, every incline a battle, every gust of wind a hand trying to shove him backward. Still, he went on, his shoes squelching against the pedals, his lungs aching as though fire burned within them. Far behind, back in Ironwood, Rose cleared the last table of the night, her hands raw from soap and heat. She stepped outside with a bag of trash, and her eyes caught the distant flicker of a bike's taillight vanishing into the storm. She knew it was Caleb. Though she had not spoken to him in weeks, she remembered his quiet determination, the way he had always carried more than any boy his age should. Returning upstairs, she found her mother coughing softly in bed. Rose laid a damp cloth across her forehead and whispered, "I saw Caleb tonight. He was helping an old man, even though it might cost him everything." Her mother's tired eyes opened, shining with a mixture of pity and pride. "Some boys carry light into the world, Rosie," she murmured weakly, "even when the world tries to snuff it out." In the hills, Caleb pushed through the dark, his body screaming with fatigue, but his heart fixed on a promise he hadn't made aloud, to see the old man safely home. Each hill rose higher, each breath grew harsher, but he pedaled on, the night closing around them like a vast and endless trial. The hills above Ironwood lay in silence, cloaked in snow and shadow, where the branches of bare maples creaked under the weight of frost and the moon carved pale lines across the drifting clouds. Caleb's legs trembled with exhaustion as he forced the bicycle up the last steep climb toward Hawthorne Lane. Each push of the pedals felt like hauling stone, his lungs burning with icy fire, his fingers stiff around the handlebars. Behind him, the old man leaned forward, mumbling softly, his voice alternating between lucidity and confusion, sometimes naming streets that no longer existed, sometimes singing a broken hymn. Caleb answered each fragment with patience, murmuring reassurances. "We're close now, just a little farther." At last the road bent, and through the veil of snow appeared a gate wrought from iron, its bars whitewashed with age and tangled with ivy frozen stiff. A lantern flickered faintly above, casting a glow on the chipped paint of a wooden sign, 92 Hawthorne Lane. Relief crashed through Caleb's body, his legs quaking with the final effort as he rolled the bicycle to a halt. He helped the old man down carefully, his own knees nearly buckling as the weight left the rack. The gate creaked when Caleb pushed it open, and a gravel drive stretched toward a large house looming in the dark. Its windows glowed with warm light, smoke curling from a chimney. A picture of comfort, so unlike the bitter world outside. He led the old man up the steps and knocked, his knuckles stiff from the cold. At first, nothing stirred. Then the door opened, and a man in his late 60s, dressed in a wool housecoat, stood framed in the light. His thinning hair was silver, his face sharp with lines of both dignity and worry. When his eyes fell on the old man at Caleb's side, his jaw dropped, and his voice broke into trembling disbelief. "Mr. Whitmore! Charles! Oh, my lord! Where have you been? We've been searching everywhere. Hospitals, shelters. We thought—" His voice cracked, and he reached forward, gripping the old man's shoulders. The old man blinked, recognition dawning briefly, and murmured, I went for a walk, or perhaps a ride, but I found my way home." He turned toward Caleb and smiled faintly. The man in the housecoat, clearly a caretaker, looked to Caleb with fierce gratitude. "You brought him back? You don't know what this means. Please come in, get warm, let us feed you, give you a ride home." His words tumbled out, desperate to repay what could not be measured, but Caleb, his breath ragged, shook his head. "No need. I should be getting back." The thought of Mr. Pierce's threat clawed at his mind. Time was already gone, but the instinct to flee from kindness, to refuse what he felt he hadn't earned, pushed him away. He fished into his satchel, found a crumpled receipt, and scribbled his number with shaking fingers. "If he ever needs help again, call me." He pressed it into the caretaker's palm, then turned to his bike. The caretaker's voice followed him, pleading, but Caleb mounted his bicycle, willed his legs to move, and rode back down into the night. The warmth of the Whitmore estate faded behind him, swallowed by the cold hills. By the time he reached Ironwood again, it was nearly midnight. The streets were deserted, houses shuttered against the storm. His body screamed for rest, but he pedaled through the silence until he reached the narrow boarding house that had been his fragile refuge. The porch light, as always, was broken, casting only darkness across the peeling paint of the two-story frame. Caleb leaned his bike against the steps, pulled off his satchel, and reached for the key in his pocket. His heart sank. The key no longer fit. He jiggled the knob, pushed, then pulled, but the lock refused. Then he saw it. A plastic bag on the porch, stuffed with his few belongings. 2 shirts, a towel, a cracked charger. A note taped to the door in thick black marker read, "Past due. Locks changed." For a long moment, Caleb stood frozen, snow drifting across his shoes, the cold cutting into his chest like a blade. His throat tightened, but no tears came. He had no strength left for them. He turned, bike at his side, and walked through the empty streets. Each breath was agony, each step heavier than the last. There was nowhere left to go. Yet, as he passed Miller's hardware store, its windows dark, he paused. Mr. Miller, a broad-shouldered man with a beard like coarse steel wool, had always been gruff, but not unkind. Caleb had carried lumber for him before, in exchange for a sandwich or a few dollars. Perhaps there was mercy to be found. He circled to the back, knocked gently on the side door. For a long moment, nothing. Then, footsteps. The door cracked open, and Mr. Miller stood in a flannel shirt, eyes narrowing at the sight of the boy shivering, hollow-eyed, snow clinging to his lashes. "Didn't make rent, did you?" His voice was rough, but not cruel. Caleb lowered his gaze and shook his head. Miller sighed through his nose, looked skyward as if appealing to some higher judge, then stepped aside. "Come on then. Storeroom's dry, cot in the corner. Don't touch the tool crates, and don't freeze on me." Caleb murmured thanks, too weary for more. Inside, the storeroom smelled of sawdust, oil, and cardboard. The cot's blanket was thin, the radiator groaned with age, but to Caleb it felt like sanctuary. He curled beneath the covers, his limbs heavy, chest aching, but heart strangely quiet. As sleep pulled him under, he thought of the old man's smile at the gate, of the lantern that had flickered above Hawthorne Lane, and of Rose's eyes watching from the diner doorway. The world was cold, but somewhere within it, small lights had begun to kindle. Morning came to Ironwood in a shy, pewter light, the kind that slides in through dusty panes as if asking permission to enter. Snow along Maple Street had crusted into a brittle rind, crunching beneath the first tires of the day. Chimney smoke rose in thin blue threads that the wind tugged apart and carried toward the lake. Inside the storeroom of Miller's Hardware, no relation to Rose, though the town's gossip loved to pretend otherwise, the radiator clanked awake like an old knight buckling on armor, and the smell of oil, sawdust, and cold iron gathered around the narrow cot where Caleb Turner blinked himself back from sleep. He was 15, and the night had stolen years from him, the ache in his legs from the uphill ride, the sting in his fingers where the wind had gnawed, the way his chest felt hollowed out and then carefully filled with something he couldn't name. He folded the thin blanket with a reverence learned from scarcity, stood, and rubbed at the grit in the corners of his eyes. Mr. Hank Miller, broad-shouldered, beard like a steel wool pad, voice lined with sandpaper, shuffled in from the front, a paper cup of coffee steaming in one hand and a brown apple in the other. "You snored like a busted carburetor," he said, pushing both into Caleb's hands before the boy could protest. "And don't say thank you yet. You'll jinx it." The joke came out flat but kind. It was Mr. Miller's way of not making charity feel like charity. Caleb smiled around the rim of the cup, let the warmth bite back at his lips, and then the bell over the front door jingled. The car outside did not belong to Maple Street. It slid to the curb like a black comma, adding a pause to a sentence the town had already finished reading. A Lincoln, polished, quiet, idled without fuss while a man in a dark coat stepped out, posture straight as a measuring stick. He carried himself like someone used to entering rooms that fell quiet. Even the bell above Miller's door seemed to ring a touch more politely. "Good morning," the man said, crisp but not cold. "I'm looking for Caleb Turner." Mr. Miller's eyes flicked toward the storeroom as if to say, "Be careful what you wished for, kid." Caleb stepped forward, coffee trembling just enough to rip a little arc onto the rim. "I'm Caleb." "Avery," the man replied, extending a card that smelled faintly of cedar. "I work for Mr. Charles Whitmore. He asked me to find you. He remembers last night. He remembers you, and would very much like to thank you properly." The words "remembers" and "properly" hung in the air like two lanterns, soft and significant. Caleb's mind darted to the note in thick black marker, "Past due, locks changed," and to the old man's hand on his shoulder at the gate. He shook his head on reflex. I should get back to work." Mr. Miller cleared his throat with theatrical boredom. "Work can spare him for an hour," he said already, reaching for the closed sign he almost never used. "If a man goes uphill for you in a storm, you don't make him pay for the weather twice." He grumbled to disguise it, but there was a smile under there. "Go on, kid. Try not to let the fancy car swallow you whole." "It won't," Avery said, amused. "The upholstery is new." It was the kind of joke that trusted everyone present to be equal, if only for a blink. Some part of the chill inside Caleb loosened. He put the empty cup down and followed the man outside. Daylight made Hawthorne Lane gentler than night had, as if the hills wanted to apologize for their meanness. The drive unspooled beneath them in smooth, measured curves. Trees that last night had been shadow sentinels now stood as tall neighbors dusted with sugar. Caleb watched the route reassemble itself in reverse. The gas station with the sputtering neon now humming like a bee with its work done. The crooked bridge where the stream's ice wore a lace collar. The long incline that had found the last ounce in his legs and demanded one more. Avery kept the quiet a companion rather than a judge. "Mr. Whitmore," he said finally, eyes still on the road, "has good days and bad. Today is good." He woke early asking for the boy with a steady voice. At the estate gate, whitewashed bars veined with ivy stiff as iron, Avery keyed them open, and the car glided toward a house that seemed built of warmed light and old promises. Inside, the air tasted of lemon oil and books. A grandfather clock ticked like a calm heartbeat. In a sunroom that looked out on a garden, kept green by stubborn glass, Charles Whitmore sat wrapped not in confusion, but in dignity, dressed in a sweater the color of oatmeal and a collared shirt softened by age. His hair, silver as lake ice, lay neat for once. His eyes, pale blue and startlingly clear, found Caleb from across the room and did not waver. "You!" he breathed, the single word a door opening. "You brought me home." He rose with care and reached out both hands. Caleb stepped forward, uncertain what to do with the urge to either bow or run. "Sir, Charles," the old man corrected gently, a smile tugging at one corner of his mouth, the mischievous part of youth peeking through the ruins of time. "We do not stand on ceremony with the person who returned me to myself." He did not speak like a grandee. He spoke like a grandfather. "Avery tells me you are 15, he said, studying the boy's face. "You carried me uphill on a bicycle that has already lived 2 lives." Caleb let out a shy breath that might have been a laugh. "The chain complains a lot," he said, and Charles nodded solemnly as if they discussed a fussy old friend. "I know the type." Then the old man's smile thinned into gravity. "I lose the path sometimes," he said, tapping his temple. "A fog that rolls in without warning. Last night it lifted long enough to see a boy who would rather be cold and kind than warm and elsewhere. He gestured to a chair. Sit. Eat something. Then allow an old man his right to make a proposition. What Charles offered was not extravagance, but anchorage. A room at the estate, sunlight, and a quilt that didn't fight you in the night. A place at the table with people who would say his name and mean it. Tutors to return him to school without asking him to trade his future for his present. There is more, he said, almost tentative, as if the thought were still shaping itself. When I was younger, we built scholarships and roofed churches, and then I got busy being important in rooms that echo. I would like to build something smaller and braver now. A fund for boys and girls who live on the edge of the map. For old folks who go missing even when they're sitting in plain sight. I'd like you to help me find them, if you wish. The invitation was a warm house in a storm. It was also a mirror, and Caleb didn't know if he liked what it showed. His hunger, yes, but also the quiet, stubborn part of him that had pedaled uphill without asking why. He made his voice steady. Mr. Witt, Charles, I didn't help you to get anything. I'm grateful, but I can't make a life out of a good deed. It wouldn't feel right. The old man's eyes held fast. And that, he said gently, is precisely why it would be safe here. The house is full of rooms, Caleb. You are not a project. You are a person. If you say no, I will say thank you and find another way to keep you warm. If you say yes, we will set a place and let the future try, not to be too surprised. Avery, by the sideboard, performing the ancient rite of tea, pretended to be a statue while somehow radiating approval. A small bead of humor bloomed and vanished. Caleb imagined the fancy spoon clutching its pearls at the rust on his bicycle chain. He looked down at his hands, at the split knuckles, and the ghost of grease embedded like a second set of lines, and then up again. I need time, he said. It was the bravest thing he could think to ask for. Take it, Charles said. But before you go today, allow me one indulgence not for you, but for someone you care about. By afternoon, Ironwood hummed with one of its gentler rumors, the kind that rattled pottery but didn't break it. The boy from the hardware store had been fetched by a car that looked like city money. In the diner window, where evening draped itself in reflections of neon and snow, Rose heard the talk stacking plates, as if stacking evidence. One waitress said it with envy, another with relief, a third with that wary tone small towns use when anything threatens to change the shape of their days. Rose's heart hit two notes at once, pride and fear. And in the room upstairs, her mother's cough stitched a familiar pattern through the thin walls. Rose carried up tea in a chipped mug and rehearsed calm. He might be going to a better place, she said, and felt the tug of a selfish thought. And away from here. Her mother, cheeks hollowed by illness and eyes still bright with an old mischief, touched Rose's hand. Baby, doors that open for one person often let in the draft that saves another. It sounded like something wise townspeople said in storybooks. Still, it settled into Rose like a seed. Near closing, a different bell rang, the sting of cold air at the diner's door, and there stood Caleb, hair still mussed by the day's wind, a paper sack in his arms. Behind him, not too close, Avery waited with the patience of a man who understood dignity well enough to give it space. Caleb lifted the bag awkwardly, boyish, as if bringing a gift to a teacher he admired. For your mom, he said, not quite looking at Rose, then meeting her gaze because he wasn't the kind to hide. From Mr. Whitmore's people, soup, bread, some fruit, and a voucher for the pharmacy. If the doctor will sign the script, it's already paid. He said it like a weather report, facts delivered carefully. For a beat, the clatter and hiss of the diner softened around them. Rose took the bag and felt its weight like something invisible lifting off her shoulders. Are you... She began and started again. Will you go live there? Caleb shook his head, then nodded, then shrugged in a way that confessed both hope and caution. He asked. I asked for time. I wanted to make sure. His eyes flicked toward the ceiling, toward the room where her mother rested. That going uphill with someone didn't mean I left everything else at the bottom of the hill. A tiny laugh escaped Rose, mostly relief, mostly gratitude at being seen in the perimeter of his choice. You talk like a person who reads the back of cereal boxes and finds poetry there, she said, and immediately flushed at her own boldness. He grinned, a flash that looked like summer suddenly remembering itself. "Sometimes the prizes are better on the back," he said. Upstairs, a cough loosened, gentler than before. They stood there a moment longer, two kids the same age wearing different kinds of winters. And then Avery cleared his throat softly, a sound designed to be obeyed without embarrassment. "We should go," he said, but the plural landed generously. Not command, companionship. Caleb nodded, turned once more to Rose. "I'll be by tomorrow to fix that loose hinge on the upstairs door," he said, the hinge he had noticed weeks ago and never had time for. "No charge." Rose rolled her eyes with feigned severity. "I accept, provided you take a bowl of soup you didn't pay for." "Deal," he said, and some corner of the future, far off and shy, waved back. Back on Maple Street, twilight sifted through the town like flour through an old sieve, softening edges and hiding sins. Mr. Miller had kept the storeroom light on, as if warding off dark thoughts. When Caleb returned, he lifted, his chin in a greeting that could be mistaken for indifference by anyone who hadn't spent a night on that cot. "You sell the kid for parts?" he asked Avery dryly. Avery's mouth did a rare thing and curved. "He's not on the market," he said. "He's on loan to this town a little while longer." He handed Mr. Miller an envelope, just a receipt for the day's kindness, but also a promise, then turned to Caleb. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to give you this." Inside was a single sheet, thick paper that felt like responsibility, not a contract, not a leash, only an invitation written in a hand that refused to tremble, a room until you don't need it, a table until you build your own, school because you deserve it. Help me find the lanterns that go out in people before their houses go dark. Caleb read it twice, then folded it carefully, aware that some papers tear if you breathe wrong. He tucked it into his satchel beside the battered envelope he had never delivered and looked up. The town's winter was not done with him, but it had shifted stance, as if the wind had decided to push from behind rather than in his face. He lay down on the cot with the smell of lemon oil and old books still clinging to him, the first syllables of a promise forming where fear used to live, and sleep came like a warm dog curling at his feet, loyal and undeserved. The winter dawn in Ironwood came reluctantly, like an old man stirring from a heavy sleep. The sky bled pale gold along the horizon, hesitant and thin, while the roofs of houses hunched beneath white drifts. The lake wind still prowled the streets, slipping through every crack and every shutter. But in the small storeroom behind Miller's Hardware, Caleb Turner woke to something gentler. The cot beneath him was stiff. The radiator still groaned in its half-broken rhythm. But there was warmth in his chest that no blanket had offered before. Folded carefully beside his satchel lay the thick paper invitation from Charles Whitmore, the words written in a hand steadier than anyone would expect from a man of his years. Caleb ran his fingers across the ink as though it might vanish if he didn't guard it, then slipped it away again, fearful of both losing it and believing in it too much. He was only 15, but already he carried choices heavy enough for grown men. Outside, Maple Street creaked to life. Plows scraped along the frozen asphalt, their yellow beacons flashing weakly in the gray light. Across from the hardware store, Rose pushed through the diner's back door, carrying a basket of linens washed the night before, her auburn hair tucked beneath a wool cap. Her mother had coughed most of the night, but the medicine delivered in Whitmore's brown paper bag had quieted her by dawn, and Rose carried the relief in her eyes even as her body sagged with fatigue. She spotted Caleb adjusting his bike chain and crossed the street, her boots crunching in the snow. "You look less like a ghost this morning," she said, her voice hoarse from hours at the diner. Caleb gave a shy smile. "Your mother, did the medicine help?" Rose nodded, the movement small but full of gratitude. "She slept," she said simply. That one word was a gift. Later that afternoon, the black Lincoln returned, not sweeping but steady, as if now accustomed to the humble rhythm of the town. Avery opened the passenger door without fanfare. "Mr. Whitmore wondered," he said, "if you might consider making the estate less empty today." Caleb glanced toward Rose, who stood in the diner doorway watching. Her expression carried both encouragement and a plea not to forget. Caleb touched the handlebars of his mother's old bicycle, then nodded. "Just for today." The drive to Hawthorne Lane no longer felt like trespassing. In daylight, the estate was softened by snow, its hedges trimmed, its long porch glowing with lantern light. Inside, Whitmore greeted him in the sunroom. His sweater was buttoned neatly, his eyes sharp again. On the table lay not contracts but maps of Ironwood, circles drawn around the diner, the hardware store, the abandoned schoolhouse at the edge of town. "We'll call it the Lantern Fund," Charles said, his voice firm but hopeful. "A light for those who've lost theirs. Youth like you, elders like me, we will give them shelter, and we will give them dignity." He looked to Caleb. "I want you to help decide where the light should fall first." Caleb felt the weight of the offer. He thought of Rose's mother coughing in her upstairs room, of the old men who lingered near the station stove in winter with nowhere else to go, of himself just nights ago staring at a bag of belongings left on a porch. "Then we start on Maple Street," he said softly, "because that's where the lights go out fastest." Charles nodded, his pale eyes brightening with something more than memory, belief. By spring, the foundation had taken its first steps. The abandoned schoolhouse was cleared, repainted, its basement warmed with donated heaters. Rose joined as a volunteer, tending to children after her shifts, her laughter filling the halls her mother once walked as a girl. Whitmore came when his mind was clear, shaking hands, telling stories, reminding the town that age need not mean exile. Caleb, though still only 15, balanced books and blueprints, studying by lantern light in a room at the estate that overlooked the garden, while on weekends he pedaled his rusted bike through the streets as if to remind himself where it all began. Some nights he would stop at the old bus stop where he had first seen Charles standing lost in the wind. He would place his hand on the cracked bench, close his eyes, and smile. The world had not grown softer, but it had grown kinder in places, and sometimes that was enough. In this story, a 15-year-old boy chose kindness over comfort, and through that small act, God worked a miracle. It reminds us that the Lord's blessings often appear not in grand displays, but in the quiet moments when we choose to help another soul. Just as Caleb's light brought hope to an old man and later to an entire community, so too can our daily choices, holding a door, offering a smile, listening when someone feels forgotten, become seeds of grace that God uses to transform lives. Each of us carries a lantern, and when we let it shine with faith and compassion, the darkness cannot prevail. Remember, miracles are not only distant stories in Scripture, they are living testimonies in our streets, our families, and our everyday encounters. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who needs a reminder of hope. Comment below with your thoughts, and write Amen if you believe God still works miracles through simple acts of love. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that uplift the spirit, and may the Lord bless you and your loved ones with light, warmth, and peace in every step of your journey.